All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for our Mobile Source Emissions Reductions Grant, How to Apply webinar. My name is Matthew Hoskins, and today I'm joined by Sheila Blanchard, an environmental program consultant and the program manager for the DERA grant. So a few housekeeping rules before we get started. All of the attendees will be muted during the webinar. Questions can be submitted into the Q&A box, and they will be addressed during the question and answer time at the end if they are not covered during the presentation. The raise hand feature will be disabled until the question and answer time and will only be considered for those who called into the webinar by phone. For those calling in, pressing *3 will raise your hand, and pressing *3 again will lower your hand. All other attendees must use the Q&A box to submit their questions. Also, this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the DAQ's Mobile Source Emissions webpage at a later date. Finally, we have 2 hours to discuss this application process, but if we complete everything and answer all the questions with some time to spare, we do have the option to adjourn early. If we are not able to answer all the questions by the end of our time, we will let you know how to get your questions to us. So with that, I will now hand it over to Sheila Blanchard to give an overview of the application process for the DERA grant. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box and we can get around to answer them at the end. Sheila?
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the How to Apply webinar for our mobile source emission reduction grants that are open right now. This is the second webinar that we've had. The first webinar, which is on our webpage, was an overview of the DERA program, what kinds of vehicles were eligible, what kinds of entities were eligible, cost shares, things like that. So if you're looking for answers on whether or not your engine is eligible, what kinds of replacements are eligible, that's where you're going to find that, as well as in the RFP itself. This one, we're going to talk a little bit today is going to be kind of the nuts and bolts of how to apply in our grant management system, what kinds of materials you need to apply, to upload, how to submit your application, as well as some of those dates for those applications, the attachments and the information required for a complete application. We won't, if you don't submit a complete application by the closing date, you will not be eligible. How we're going to evaluate the applications and score the applications, where you can find more information after this. And then we'll try and answer some of your questions that you have about this program and how to apply. Okay, so we released this RFP on November 1st. So that's when the grant management system opened. It's open now to submit an application. The RFP is going to close on February 2nd, which is not that far from today. So a couple of weeks from now. We'll be doing our evaluation of the applications between February and March. We'll hopefully, and this timeline depends on how many applications we get. If we get fewer applications, it won't take nearly as long. If we get a lot, it may take a little bit longer. So keep that in mind. We hope to notify our applicants and get acceptance letters out in April of this year. Hopefully we'll get through the contracts by April, May. Once those contracts are fully executed, you could begin work on the grant, the replacement, or whatever, the retrofit, whatever it is that you've applied for. This year is different in that we get 2 years to complete these grants. So all work must be completed by September 30th, 2026. This also means that there won't be any extensions, and if there are, it's on a case-by-case basis. So because we have this extended deadline, we expect all projects, all paperwork to be submitted to us by that hard deadline of September 30th, 2026. We have about $1.1 million in anticipated available funds, so that can fund a fair amount of projects this round. So for this webinar, in the last webinar, we went through a lot of the things that you need in order to apply. And these things include an NCID, which you need to have to request access to the GMS. And honestly, if you are hoping to apply, you should have already requested access to the grant management system. That's required to submit an application. And like I said, we covered that in detail in the last webinar. I am going to briefly go over that because we haven't had a ton of requests. So I want to make sure that all of you know that you have to do this before you can apply. The application itself doesn't take very long at all to complete, but this part, getting the NCID, getting access to the GMS, can potentially take from 1 to 2 weeks, depending on other folks in the system. So we want to make sure that you can apply. So the sooner you can do this, the better. The last day that you could be granted access and still have time to apply for this grant is January 19th, 2024, which is next week. Once again, late applications will not be accepted. You will not be able to push submit on these applications once that deadline passes. Okay, so quickly, to get an NCID, you will have to get an NCID. Once you get your NCID, there are multiple steps to get access to the system. You have to submit the Enterprise Business External Access Request application to get the GMS. You have to complete and submit an NC Substitute W-9 and email that to our service email, which is that daq.mscb-ncdaq grants email. Once you get that welcome to the DAQ Enterprise Business System, that means you're in the system and you can begin to access the portal, which is this link here, the NCEBS portal, which is our GMS. Okay, I'm going to refer to it as the Grant Management System. The GMS is how you will get access to the application itself. So like I said, there's a bunch of steps before you can even get into the system. The NCID, we have lots of rules about what an NCID looks like. If you work for the government already or work for the state, you probably already have one. If you've applied through this program before, you already have one. So if you already have one, you can skip to get access to the GMS. If you already have access to the GMS, you can go ahead and submit an application. So what you're going to do is you're going to set up an individual NCID. We have instructions through this link, and once we send out this this presentation, these links will become live in the presentation, and you can just access everything through the PowerPoint. So what you use, you're going to create your NCID through this register link here, and then once you get your NCID username and your password, that is what you'll actually put into the GMS portal to get into the GMS. So you get your NCID. The NCID formats are very specific. Usually it's your first initial, middle initial, last name. It could be your first name, your last name. It could be your first name, last name with a number, et cetera, et cetera. It needs to be, this is for you to be able to submit an application on behalf of the company or organization that you submit the W-9 for. So these are individual NCIDs, these are individual accounts, these are individual credentials that are tied to you getting into the GMS on behalf of the company and organization. Once you have that NCID, you will go into the external request application. Once again, this link will be live when you download this presentation, and you can find all of this on the MobileSource webpage for these grants. We have links to all of these. So you will go in and you will put in the information here with your NCID to get access to the GMS. And then you will also complete the W-9, which is the entity. So if you see here, you have the organization name that you are officially applying on behalf of. That's where that goes. That organization address should be the legal address. The city is the legal city, legal state. That is what's going to tie your credentials to the tax entity that you are applying to. Each organization is allowed up to 3 authorized users. If you have folks that have left and you already have your 3 authorized users, you have to send us an email so we can pull off somebody if there's somebody in your organization that can no longer submit applications. So, but if you don't have 3 yet, you can have up to 3 people, and they will get access to the same application that you have access to. Once all of this has happened, you will get a welcome email from the NCDOT SAP Support Services. This means that you can go ahead, you can go through the portal, you can use your credentials, and you can begin your application. All right. And just so you know, this is what the W-9 form looks like. It's not the same as the federal W-9. This is the state of North Carolina substitute W-9 form. This is the taxpayer identification number that you use to do business in North Carolina. And this is how we will pay you through the GMS. So everything here needs to be correct. And you need to make sure that you send it to that service email address along with your request for the GMS. This is what the landing page of our GMS looks like. As you can see right here, the username will be, you know, that username that you sign up for, and then the password that you use for NCID, and that's how you will log on. The GMS, we've tried to make it pretty easy to use, but we have lots of manuals and webinars that go through very explicitly, as well as some training modules within the GMS itself to walk you through the application process. But these links are live here, so you can download the external user manual if you like something to kind of flip through and kind of walk you through the process. We also have some basic webinars from our Volkswagen program that can show you how to navigate some of the GMS stuff. So this is the first step to actually getting to the application. Okay, so now that you have access to the GMS, before you even begin an application, there's some things to understand about this grant program. This is a reimbursement program for diesel equipment upgrades or replacement. This means that you will have to pay for the new equipment and then go into the grant management system once you've done your scrappage and once you've done your procurement and request reimbursement for those funds. There could be a lag time of between 1 or 2 months between that time. So you should be prepared for the fact that it's a reimbursement. There are mandatory cost shares for almost all project types. So DERA will pay some proportion of the cost for replacement, and then you will have a mandatory cost share for what is the remainder of the cost of that replacement. Existing diesel equipment must be scrapped. Scrappage is a specific process that I'll talk about in a little bit. But you will have to destroy that old equipment after you buy the new equipment. And you must scrap that replaced equipment within 3 months of taking delivery of the new equipment. DERA, the program is very conditional on this. If you wait 3 or 4 months to scrap, it will be considered fleet expansion, and you will not be able to get your reimbursement for that. So it's really important to keep these timelines in your mind while you're going through this grant program. We'd hate for you to not be able to get reimbursement for some of these projects if you don't scrap that equipment on the right timeline. Some other important criteria this is an easy way to figure out if it's eligible is that we will replace a like for a like. So if you want to replace a Class 7 heavy-duty vehicle, you can buy a Class 7 heavy-duty vehicle to replace it. All replaced equipment must have at least 3 years of useful life. This is because in a lot of ways, this program is a mitigation program where we want to mitigate the emissions that are coming out of older equipment by replacing it with new equipment. Finally, all of the equipment vehicle and the new equipment that will be replacing it must be operated at least 70% in North Carolina, and they need to be in North Carolina for the next 5 years. So you can't take a piece of equipment and then sell it, a new piece of equipment, and then sell it off to a different state. You may sell it, but you can't sell it to a different state. It needs to be in North Carolina. Okay, so you're going to gather together all of your materials to apply in the GMS. And so all of the things that you're going to need will be included in your application. So this includes the fleet information. These will be the vehicles that you want to replace or that you want to retrofit, or that the shore power, whatever your project is. If it's a diesel engine, it likely falls under DERA. So whatever engine you're trying to replace, you need that information. You're gonna need a lot of meta information, like the year and the manufacturer. And I'm gonna show you where that goes in the application. You're going to need your budget information. So how much is it going to cost to replace this with a new like-for-like vehicle or engine, and the engine can include the installation costs. You need contact information for the fleet owner. You need photos of all of these vehicles. As you can probably imagine, there's a lot of different terminology used for different kinds of heavy duty equipment. So these photos help us be able to do the emissions analysis, because we have sort of generalized understanding of what things are. So an excavator may be different from some kind of top loader or something like that. So photos help us really understand what you're trying to replace. You're going to need quotes from the manufacturer. And these are required so you can give us that budget information. We have a checklist of some of the other materials, and then the DAQ vehicle equipment spreadsheet, which is what's giving us the fleet information for what you want to replace and then what you want to replace it with. I'm going to go through all of this. Oh, I had that twice. All right, so once you get in the grant management system, you log in. And just one hint, this is the landing screen. This is what you're going to see when you log in. One of the things that you can go to if you need a little bit more guidance is this DAQ training library. In that DAQ training library, it has a lot of modules, which include submitting an application, submitting a claim, which is how you'll get your reimbursement, things like that. So that's a good place to get some help if you need it. So once you get into this landing page, you're going to go into create new application, right? You'll push on that. And then I would recommend just pushing search, and search is going to give you all of the programs that you can apply for under that's available in the DAQ grant management system. Well, lucky for you, there's only one that's open. So you'll push search, it'll give you that result. Right here, you could tell there were 4 that were open, but now there's only going to be one. I didn't update this slide, but it will say the FY 2023 Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, and you'll go to this link and it will get you to the application itself. The ID is the NCDEQ DAQ 0017. So this is the 17th grant program that we've had in this system. So that's the one you'll look for. It's the only one there. So you'll push that link and it'll take you right to the application. This is what the first page of the application looks like. You're going to want to fill all of this in. This includes the project title. This includes the tax ID of the organization that matches that W-9 that you submitted, that you're submitting on behalf of. Program type is not going to change. It's DERA EMA 10. It's going to be DERA type projects. The number of vehicles is going to be the number of vehicles in your fleet that you'd like to replace. The eligible applicant type is going to be if you're a government agency or a private entity. For DERA, it doesn't matter that much. The cost shares are the same. For Volkswagen, it was different, but whatever your applicant type is. And then the project type is going to give you a list of all of the different possible project types from engine replacement to vehicle replacement with low NOx. So we ask that when you do these applications, if you have a fleet that you're replacing, say, 10 vehicles with 10 diesel vehicles, that you can do that all on one application. However, if you're moving between vehicle replacements, say you want to do an electric replacement that's off-road and then an on-road diesel replacement, we ask that you separate those into two different applications. Mainly because the system is going to ask for the project type, and that project type is going to determine what your cost share is required on the next page. So this is the project location. So this is going to be where the vehicle is going to be housed. So wherever the vehicle is going to be doing its duty cycle. So this county is where we're going to get the county of activity. That's in how we're gonna quantify the emissions and quantify the scores. Okay, so remember the street address is where the vehicle is going to be used. These are the contacts that we're going to use throughout the lifetime of the project. So please make sure that you have at least two contacts that are different. We've had problems where we aren't able to contact grant recipients because they've only put one person in here. So please, the project manager is going to be the primary representative that I, as the program manager, will contact. The authorized representative is the person that essentially signs the contract. So this is the person that's in charge. If you're in a county organization, this is going to be the county manager or whomever has the authority to allow you to engage in a contract. And then the financial contact is often the person that we send some of the more financial stuff to, like if we need an updated W-9 or if we need anything like that. So those are the different roles for the folks that are going to be on these projects, and we'd like for them to be separate entities, so that we always have someone that we can contact in case we need to. Another thing about these applications, you have to fill in all of these fields. If you can't, it won't let you go to the next. Like if you do a check here, it will give you an error. So just remember that throughout all the application. If there's anything missing, you're not going to be able to submit at the end, and it will make you kind of look over what you need to add or what you don't need to, what fields you need to fill out. So remember that as you're going through here. So these are our contacts. As you can tell, we're also moving up here. We went from the project, which is the overview of the project. We're looking at the contacts now. The next place we're going is the budget. Okay, as I mentioned before, this is the total project budget. It's pulled out by infrastructure and by equipment. So if you are asking for infrastructure, these infrastructure costs will be on this line. The matching funds and the requesting funds will not let you put in anything that isn't the same as what your required cost share has to be. Say if you're doing a diesel replacement and you get 25% from DERA, your requested funds can only be 25% of that project total that you put in here. So this is informed by this project type field here where it says please select. So that's why we ask that you divide if you're doing multiple vehicles and multiple different types with an electric or a diesel, that these are two different applications. And so yeah, so this is only going to let you request as the maximum that you can request. So just so you know what those funding levels are, These are very specific to the kinds of projects. In general, for electric replacements, it's 45%. Deere will pay 45% up to the cost of the vehicle as well as the infrastructure. 35% for CARB low NOx engines, and these low NOx engines are those that are included in things like compressed natural gas. Propane are typically considered low NOx engines. So Deere will pay up to 35% of that replacement. And then a diesel to diesel replacement is usually 25%, and this is for a vehicle. And as you can see, if we're looking at just the engine replacement, because those replacements tend to cost less, there's a bump up in what Deere will pay. Deere will pay 60% of a retrofit for an engine replacement for a zero emission, 50% for low NOx, 40% for diesel engine replacement, and that includes the installation cost for doing those replacements. So those replacement costs will be put into the DAQ spreadsheet. There's all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of rules when it comes to retrofits with idle reduction, with exhaust after treatment, and the idle reduction on the highway, marine short. We don't get a ton of these projects, so if you have questions about these, I just recommend you give me a call and I'll talk you through it and talk you through about what we'll pay for and what we won't. So yeah, for the most part, what we get are replacements, engine replacements, and engine vehicle and engine replacements. Okay. So now we're in the project details. So this is where we're asking you to tell us what you want to do. I want to replace 10 vehicles with 10 new vehicles. This is really the first one. The description of the proposed project is really just a top level bird's eye overview of what you would like to do. We ask you how this request will benefit diesel emissions. So this is where you're going to tell you if you're at a goods movement facility, if you, you know, if you are in the middle of a complete fleet transition, say you're moving all your fleet to CNG or something like that. This is where you tell us that how many of your previous vehicles or how big your fleet is, how many of your previous vehicles have already been replaced, things like that. Additionally, like we ask the third question, the likelihood that will incentivize other emissions reductions. This is also where you say you're maybe you're committed to a fleet transition, things like that. We ask, I don't know why. So we ask if there's any co-benefits of the project, if there are any sensitive populations. So this is going to be some of the questions if your facility is located across the street from a school, things like that. So these essays give us a lot of the meta information that we need to do the evaluation and analysis of your application for funding. So if there's something special about your project, if there's something that you want to tell us, this is where you would put it. And it won't let you certify until you fill out all of these fields, with the exception of the last one, which is just if you want to tell us anything else. So once again, you finally get to the certification, and this is where you'll sign your name, your title. It will date it for you. And then you push check, and check will go through all of these fields and make sure that everything is filled out and that everything fits the parameters of what can be in there. Because if you remember, the budget is tied to the project and some of the project details. You have to fill out some of those essays. So it won't let you submit until all of those things make sense. So this is essentially just the paper part of the application that's required. There's still a lot of attachments that are required to make a complete application. So once you finish this, you can submit, and you don't have to submit immediately. Like, you can push check, and then you can save and close if you want to come back to it. And I'll show you how to do that in a couple of slides. So you can save and close, but once you submit, it comes to us. If there's something wrong with it, we'll send it back to you and you have to resubmit. And all of this has to happen before that February 2nd date. Once you submit, you're going to get, or saved, you're going to get an application ID. You should write this down, keep it. We have a link to the checklist of required attachments once you submit this. And then you can also like choose files and attach to the application from this screen. However, I think there's an easier way to do it, and I'll show you where that is. So once you get into the application, let's go back here. So you've submitted your application. You're not going to go to create new application. Now you're going to go to view application. Okay, view application is going to give you the opportunity to upload your required documents. All right, so this is where you're going to see this screen. So this is that application number that you have. Once you get in, you're going to go to the attachment, and you hit attachment, and it's going to ask you to find the file. You're going to put a label on it, and then you're going to attach it, and it'll show up down here under attachments that you have attached it. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, just call us and we'll help you add the attachments. So let's just go back to what is required for the attachments. The first thing you need is going to be the vehicle spreadsheet. This is where we're getting our fleet information as well as the replacement information. Quotes. So this should include itemized quotes for any equipment or any infrastructure. For infrastructure, it should include the installation costs as well as the equipment costs. DERA has very specific things on what it will pay for when it comes to infrastructure. And essentially for DERA, it's everything in front of the meter. Okay, so so any of that install equipment can be added to your quotes. We also are asking for an infrastructure acknowledgement that you've consulted with your utility. This is so that we know that that you're not just that you know sort of what you're getting into before putting in EV infrastructure. There's not going to be any surprise costs there for you that will make it so you can't complete the project. So we're going to ask that, and this is fairly common for any kind of electric infrastructure project. Those of you on the call that are thinking about this has probably already done this. Additionally, we're going to have an acknowledgement of Build America, Buy America compliance. So this is, you can put this in the essay. You can also just write up that in your quotes for the installation of the equipment that the vehicles or that the equipment does comply with Build America, Buy America. Because there's not really a one size fits all for this Build America, Buy America compliance, if you are planning on doing an electric project for this round, I very much recommend that you give me a call and we'll talk about what that compliance looks like. I've been working with EPA to try and figure out a way to make that more accessible to grantees. So just go ahead and we'll just start working through and communicating through these projects. Finally, the EV projects also require an acknowledgement of workforce development. This is essentially that, and a lot of these things are offered when you buy electric vehicles. They provide training for the folks that are going to be doing the maintenance and also driving and things like that. So that's something that's usually included in these projects. For the non-EV vehicles, for everything, we need pictures of engine tags We need pictures of the VINs, and then we need a picture of the original equipment from the front and the side. So additionally, we need any other supporting documentation for this application. Maybe you have a partnership with somebody. So any of that stuff that is a part of this project, you would also upload that into your application. Okay, so what does this vehicle spreadsheet look like? We're asking for a lot of information. This is what EPA asks for when we do these projects. So we're asking them for you. So this is the spreadsheet for the equipment that you want to replace. We have different sheets depending on the project. So if you have on-road equipment, this is going to be short haul. Anything that is basically registered on the streets of North Carolina is going to be considered on-road. We have off-road, which are going to be construction type equipment, pumps, generators, anything like that that doesn't get, that is usually, it's the utilization is usually cataloged in hours as opposed to miles. So that's an easy way to figure out what, if you're looking at off-road equipment. We have a separate tab for marine because we're asking for some different things with marine. We have a separate tag for locomotive. And then any infrastructure for any of these other 4 sheets, we have a separate infrastructure tab that you should fill out to put in the infrastructure information. So as you can see from the spreadsheet, the top of it is just basically information. It's going to be the county that it does its duty cycle, the zip code, whether it's on road, the target fleet, whether it's a refuse hauler or a school bus. The class is important. The group sector, municipal, construction, things like that. We ask for the VIN of the vehicle make, the vehicle model, the model year. Then you can get all these from the pictures that you're submitting. So we're also looking for those engine serial numbers, the engine make, the engine model year. So we're asking for a lot of information here, and it is up to you to be as you have to be as complete as you can be in order to be considered for these grants. This is where we're getting our emissions information and how we're going to evaluate each of these replacements. So we're asking for the amount of fuel used. Most fleet operators have records of how many miles something is going or how much fuel is using a year. That's where you're going to get that. Idling hours, and then the remaining life. So that's how many years you would keep this vehicle in your fleet if you were not replacing it through this program. And as I said before, there should be at least 3 years of remaining life on these replaced vehicles. And I realize this is a lot of information. Once again, call us if you need some help working through it. All of us can help you fill it in or tell you where you can find this information. The bottom part of the spreadsheet is the new vehicle information. So we see it's going to be the type of upgrade. You can see here if it's a vehicle replacement CNG, vehicle replacement with electric vehicle. So these are drop downs and you can just pick whichever one is appropriate. The class, so a class 8 should only replace a class 8. We're asking for the total cost that it costs to replace the unit. This includes installation. The equipment cost, so this is the vehicle, the labor, which would include the installation, how much you're asking from us for the project. And then as you can see, it calculates this cost share. So whatever these project types are, we won't fund anything that's calculating above the cost share that we're allowed to fund you at. And then this is the new vehicle information. All this should be available on the quotes that you get for the new vehicle. You don't have to have the family name. That is not always known when you order a piece of equipment. We know that, but so just fill out what you can, and That's pretty much it. Like I said, the quotes that you get should match the information on the spreadsheet. If you are anticipating, you know, 5 to 7% inflation before you're able to procure the vehicle within 2 years, you're welcome to add that to this amount over the quote. Just make sure that this amount matches what is in the application for how much you're requesting. Okay. Once again, this spreadsheet can be uploaded anytime during the application process, even before you submit your application. But it will need to be uploaded and part of the application by that February 2nd deadline. Okay, so let's say that something is that your numbers in your spreadsheet are not matching your numbers in the budget data. I'm going to send that application back to you, and you're going to get a message that says that application has been sent back to you. So instead of create new application, you're going to go now to edit application, and it will allow you to make the changes that I've requested in that application. Okay, and usually I'll call you up or I'll send you an email or I'll put it in the notes about what you need to do. So you know exactly what you have to do to edit the application and then resubmit. You have to go through the submit process. Okay, so one thing that you can do once you're editing, it's going to take you back to this landing page for the application. You can either put that application ID in here, or you could just leave that blank and push search. Search is going to give you all of the applications that you have started. And if that's just one application, then that's just one application. So so the search button is really your friend, especially when all these fields are empty, and it will take you where you need to go. And it will tell you when I've returned it, it will tell you that it's been returned. If you've just saved it and not submitted, it will say in process. If you have submitted, it will say submitted. So the status will tell you exactly where that application is in the system. Once again, if I've returned the application and you change that budget data to match what's in your spreadsheet, or vice versa, you will have to go back to the certification and you have to resubmit, and then it goes back into my workflow. And as long as you do that before February 2nd, you will be good. All right, this is going to be the screen you get when you have submitted that application. So once again, you can choose a file and attach here the quotes, all of the DAQ spreadsheet, the letter of support from your city council, whatever you need to attach, you can do it from here, or you can do it from the view application screen. So once again, here's the view application. Please do not create multiple applications. Those muck up our system and they get stuck, and then it's confusing about which applications you're working on. So don't do that unless you have multiple applications. So once again, once you submit, your main buttons here are going to be view application, or if I send it back to you, is going to be edit application. Okay. You're never going to go back to create unless it's next year and we have more money. The other things you're going to find here, you see create new claim. Claim is where you're gonna get your claim for your reimbursement. So the claims go through the same process like the applications do. You create a new claim, you can edit a new claim, you can view a claim. Once again, we have this DAQ training library will walk you through all that. They have modules that will kind of just like show you exactly how to do an application. But in my opinion, the application itself isn't that hard. It's getting the information for the application that tends to be the hardest. So if you haven't already done that, I would get on that. Okay, so once again, finding your application, same thing, you can get the application ID or just push search. Once again, you can add attachments to a submitted application. You can add attachments to a returned application. You can add attachments to an in-process application. You can add attachments anytime, and it will list all of these attachments. One thing we ask for the attachments is we're reading through these attachments. We'd like to know what they are. So if it's a quote for infrastructure, label it quote for infrastructure. If it's the NCDAQ spreadsheet, label it the NCDAQ spreadsheet. If it's a letter of support, label it the letter of support. Because at the end of these applications, you're going to have probably 9 or 10 attachments and we're going to need to know what those are when we're looking at them to assess these applications. So just do us a favor and name them appropriately. I feel like I've said a lot about that. So let's talk a little bit about the project scoring criteria and the applications. We usually get, I want to say in the past 6 years that I've been here, we get probably 9 or 10 applications each year. And those depending on how many vehicles are in each application will be put into our emissions calculations. And then all of those vehicles, and it's not at an application level, it's at a vehicle level, will be scored on this criteria. And then we will sort them. I will send it to selection committee, and then they will pick, depending on the kind of funding and how we can fund and where we can fund, they will make decisions based on the scoring as well as some of the other things that you put in your application on what will be funded. The first thing that we're going to score on are emissions reductions. This is usually NOx. Sometimes we include PM 2.5 because that's part of the DERA guidelines. So if you have a really good project that's getting a lot of emissions reductions, and usually older engines, larger engines get fairly high emissions reductions, especially if they can go for a long time, 20 more years. Those are going to be very good emissions reductions. We will score all of these vehicles in a group, and the highest will get those 35 points. We have lifetime cost effectiveness. Cost effectiveness is essentially the amount of bang for our buck that we're getting for these emissions reductions. So the less expensive your project is for those more emissions reductions, the more competitive it will be in the assessment process. So remember, this is a competitive grant program. Vehicles are competing against other vehicles, so it is possible that we may fund 5 of your 10 vehicles, or one vehicle out of your project. So if it's like the highest scoring, so this is how we're getting those scores. Co-benefits are essentially the other emissions that are reduced by these replacements. These include carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons. Environmental justice is a score that's based on the county for that duty cycle where the vehicle is taking place. And if you have a I don't think I said this, but if you have a multi-county project, on the application, you can say multi-county or primary county, because in the spreadsheet, we ask for the specific county that vehicle will be doing its duty cycle. I know that we have a lot of grantees that have fleets in different counties, and so that's how you would tell us which vehicle is operating in which county is in the vehicle spreadsheet. So, and that's where we'll get this data. So, or these scores. The environmental justice score is based on county. A priority county is based on whether you're in Cabarrus, Gaston, Iredell, Lincoln, Mecklenburg, Rowan, and Union. You probably recognize this from, these are also the maintenance counties. Historically under resource county, I will show you a map of where those are. Electric projects will get a bonus of 5 points. They tend to not score well in a in a whole group of vehicles for lifetime emissions for cost effectiveness specifically. So they get a little bump to help them be kind of competitive in the field. Minority women-owned business, you should tell us this in your essay, in your application, if this is the case, and you get a bump there. And then an additional criteria that is set by DERA EPA this year is a goods movement facility. So if you are doing a yard spotter, that would be considered a good movement facility. Any place where you're moving large amounts of merchandise, ports, things like that would get this bonus point here. All right. Just a brief overview of what environmental justice is. Fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So this is to address historical inequities that have occurred based on certain kinds of environmental policy that has resulted in an increased amount of air emissions burden in certain populations. So that's essentially what environmental justice is. We did our environmental justice team developed a way for us to use emissions burden data along with some of the economic data from our community survey to get these numbers. We also have a historically under-resourced county. This is less about emissions or environmental burden, and a little bit more about economic burden. And so these are our historically under-resourced counties, and a list of those. So you get those 5 bonus points if you are if that vehicle is doing its duty cycle in one of these counties. Okay, so just a few tips and some things for you to know. Remember, you can't increase your fleet size. We want an engine gets destroyed for the replacement of a new one. That's the most basic that this can get. It should be a Class 8, should replace a Class 8. You're welcome to go with a Class 6 to replace a Class 8. We do allow that, but you're not allowed to replace a larger piece of equipment with a smaller, with a smaller piece of equipment with a larger piece of equipment. We'd like your budget information to be as accurate as possible. Like I said, you can add a little bit of cushion for potential increases in inflation over those quotes. Just make sure that what you're asking for in the spreadsheet matches what's in the whole budget. We reserve the right to give partial funding, and this will mostly be at the vehicle level. It's not often that we will only give partial what you've asked for a vehicle, but that is possible. The essays are important because if we're evaluating similar projects, then we're kind of looking for things to give the selection committee reasons to award your project. Once again, I've said this, we will not accept late applications. 11:59 p.m. on February 2nd, 2024 is the very last moment that you could submit an application. One thing that we're hoping to get to that contract space pretty quickly. We've gotten to a point where it doesn't take as long as it used to. You're not allowed to order or do any work on the grant until you have a fully executed contract. You may get an award letter. The award letter requires you to take the award, and then we have to get information for the contract. So you can't do any work until a contract is fully executed, unless you get explicit permission from us. Your application, DERA funding happens in a lot of different places. There's GRADE funding, there's other CMAQ funding, there's all kinds of funding that does similar things to DERA. So your application, if we can't fund it, we may share it with another agency to see if they can fund it. So hopefully you're okay with that. Finally, once you're in this GMS, the GMS is going to be your landing spot for all things, all interactions with this grant. So you will have to use it to submit a claim. You have to use it to sign and get the agreements and upload the documentation for the agreements, things like that. So once you get in the GMS, or if you want to even apply next year, say you want to apply, we'll have funding next year as well. If you don't get into the GMS and get inactive, you may have to request access again, and that can sometimes be a little bit difficult. So even if you you just may want to log in once in a while to make sure that you don't become inactive in our GMS. And I guess I'll just reiterate this again. If we award your application, if you get that award letter, just remember that's not a fully executed contract. A fully executed contract is something signed by both you and DEQ, and that's when you can begin work on the project. And we'll do our best to get that out as quickly as we can after awarding. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how to get reimbursement. Once again, it can take 1 to 2 months to get that reimbursement. So make your plans accordingly. Claims are submitted in the GMS. You are required to report quarterly, every quarter on what you've been doing on the grant. These are not long reports. They're pretty easy to fill out, but we do require them for you to get your reimbursement. We will have to schedule a site visit, and I'll have a webinar for all awardees where I go through all of this much more explicitly, so you know exactly what is required of you before after award. We will have to schedule site visits to go see the purchased equipment. We don't need to see the scrapped equipment, but we will have to see the purchased equipment. And then reimbursement will include invoices, proof of scrappage photos, new equipment, things like that, final reports. Just to talk about scrappage, like I said, all engines, all things that you buy to replace something, you will have to scrap that something. Scrapped is very specific. EPA does not budge on this at all. So this includes, at the minimum, a 3-inch hole in the engine block. And we ask for pictures, documentation of this. And this is going to be something you would use a welder, arc welder, or something to get that hole. If it's a vehicle as opposed to an engine, we ask that the chassis also has to be cut in half. The frame rails have to be cut completely in half. And I've got some pictures of what that looks like. And you must do this. So once you put the vehicle into service, and we realize that sometimes it takes a little bit of time for vehicles to get their registration and things like that. But once that vehicle goes into service, you have 3 months to scrap your old equipment, or you will not be able to get reimbursement. Just so you know, 3-inch hole in the chassis, and then, or a 3-inch hole in the engine, and then the chassis cut in half. There's no way that these engines or these chassis can go back on the road, and that's what EPA wants to see for this funding. All right. If you are not on our Mobile Sources email list, please subscribe. You'll get all of the updates about DERA. You'll get the awards list. You'll get the announcements for next year's DERA, forever and ever until you ask us not to send it to you. So put the word subscribe and then send it to DAQ MSCB. This is our service email. All right, so just a couple of helpful hints. I would apply early. We haven't gotten any applications yet, so it's a little down to the wire for me. Once again, February 2nd is the closing date. So the sooner you can get at least some of those materials to me or in the application, the sooner I can give you feedback and make sure that it's ready to go when we close on February 2nd. Once again, we won't accept late applications. And you can contact any of us for questions. for assistance to walk through. I work from 7:30 to 4 every day. So anytime between those hours, I would be glad to help you out. I will not be answering any questions on February 2nd after 4 o'clock. So that's something to keep in mind. So yeah, so just keep in mind these timelines, and know that we're here to help you, and we're here. We really want to get some good applications, and we'll do really whatever it takes to get you there. Once again, you can send questions about the application if you don't want to talk to me on the phone, or whatever. You can send questions directly to our service email, and I will send you very specific instructions, detailed answers. We have this GMS external user manual. As far as if you are having problems with the EBS, with the grant management system, that we do not, with the exception of getting access, we don't really mess with that. If you're getting error messages, you have to email the EBS support folks at DOT, and they will remedy those for you. So it's almost like they're more like the technical support for the grant management system, whereas we do really everything else when it comes to the application itself. This is my contact information. You're welcome to email me anytime, call me. Matthew also works on the DEER program. He introduced me earlier. And then we have Brian Phillips, who is, he knows really everything about everything. So also a good resource there. And if you choose to download and use this presentation as a resource, which I recommend that you do, here are some of the links. Most of the links that I've referred to throughout the presentations, these will be live. So the DEER page, where you should be able to find all the information you need to apply, as well as one thing I will say on this DEER page, there are examples of applications. There are previous recipients of these grants, so you can see how they've scrapped their vehicles, what those looks like. We have essay questions that kind of help you figure out what to put in those essays. We've got all kinds of stuff on that DEER page to help you navigate these applications. We have the DEER eligibility tool if you're still wondering if your diesel equipment is eligible and how much of a cost share you'll be required to pony up. You can use that. That's basically a form where you answer questions, and it will direct you to the program that you would apply for, what you'll put in that drop down. We also have the guidance, and then grant management system help, and then a list of all the forms, and then a link to that previous how to apply webinar that I did a couple months ago to help you out a little bit. All right, so I have talked a lot, and I know that was a lot of information, but really need to open it up for some questions. So what's going to happen there is Matthew is going to read the questions and I'll answer them. So please go ahead if you have any questions and type those into the chat bar. I can't see those, so he's going to read them to me. And I'll do my best to answer your questions.
All right, thank you, Sheila. Nice presentation. Definitely a lot of information. So like she said, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type those into the Q&A box on your screen. I do see we have somebody calling in. So for anybody calling in, if you have any questions, you can press *3 to raise your hand, and then we can unmute you and let you speak if you have any questions. And *3 again to lower your hand. So to start, we have a question here about, will the slides be shared to the attendees? I can go ahead and take that. Yes, they will. Whenever we get this posted onto our webpage, we will also send this out to the attendees. So we will have a recording of the webinar as well as the slides with all the links and everything. Another question we have, are railcar movers eligible to replace freight switchers?
I think that unfortunately I'm not that familiar with the terminology. Can you tell us whether or not they do the same duty cycle? Because essentially if the rail car mover does the same duty cycle in the same area as the freight switcher, and they're the same class, it would be eligible. But if not, if they're two different pieces of equipment, it may not be.
And there is a part two to that question. If so, can they be tier 4 or do they need to be all electric?
Well, there's no, they do not have to be all electric. And they probably have to be tier 4. I didn't go into the tier requirements for the various pieces. That's getting into a little bit of the weeds. But you can, depending on the age or the tier of the existing equipment, you could replace with commercially available tier equipment. But that would be really, I would ask you to give me a call so we could talk about the specific requirements of that particular project, and what is allowable under the DERA program.
All right. And our next question is, just to be clear, the $1.1 million will be distributed amongst all the accepted applicants, or does each awarded applicant get that amount? And I'll take that one again. Yeah, we're gonna distribute the 1.1 million among all of the awarded applicants. So will we receive a submission checklist similar to the VW grant?
There is a checklist. Let's see. Here under the confirmation, when you have submitted your application, that's a link to the checklist. I think we need to make sure that we've put the new checklist in there. I think we have. And that checklist is also on our web page for all of the required, all the requirements for this program. So I could pull it up and okay, so can you see the web page, Matthew?
No, I don't see it. It popped up for a short second, but it's back to the
Okay,
presentation.
hold on. What about now?
Nothing now.
Okay.
There we go. That's it.
Okay. So this is the web page that has everything on it that you should need to apply. It has the press release, has the amount of funding. It will have this webinar when we finish it. The eligibility tool I mentioned. In the documents in the workshops, here we have the RFP, we have the vehicle spreadsheet that you'll need, and then we have the required attachments checklist right here. So you'll also get this at the end of the application, but this is what you're going to need with some specifics about Buy America, et cetera, et cetera. We have, once again, the RFP, how to register for an NCID, We have an example of the application spreadsheet that's filled in. We have an example of the application with some essay questions. And then this is a link to the old webinar, as well as a question and answers list. We'll have something similar to this for this webinar. So this landing page, you should be able to find most everything that you need for this application. And one other thing, I don't know if it's in here. So one thing that is here is the specific, actually it's not. So the EPA guidance is not on here. That's where you'll find more specifics about some of the hours requirements for agricultural pumps. Those are things that if you have something that's different from a like for like replacement, then I think you should just give us a call and we'll tell you about what you need.
All right, thank you, Sheila. Another question we have. Once we destroy the old diesel vehicle and provide photo evidence of the destruction, are we allowed to scrap the vehicle and keep the proceeds?
Yep. Yeah, we don't ask for documentation of the metal scrap or anything like that. We just need documentation that you've drilled the hole in the engine, that you've cut the chassis in half, and then what you do with it after that is really up to you.
All right. How many applications do you expect to receive and how many will be funded? What is the the maximum amount of funding per application?
Um, Honestly, that changes every year. I would say we get around 8 or 9 applications per year. We usually have maybe 10 or 15 vehicles that are applied for. And usually we're able to allocate the funding amongst those applications. However, there are sometimes really, there are applications that, things like transit buses tend to be really expensive, that are good projects that may get more funding than some other projects. So really, it just depends on those criteria for the assessment of evaluation of the project, and how the selection committee wants to distribute those funds. So it's really hard to say at this point. Uh, I I don't know. You can look at the past projects and see how many we have reports on how many applications there were, how many vehicles there were, how many were funded, what proportion of those funded went to certain things. So you can find that on the previous DERA web pages.
Thank you, Sheila. So there's a question here about the deadline to complete. So what happens if an application is approved, but the vendor or manufacturer experiences production delays and the project extends past the initial contract?
So the initial contract is going to 2 years. I don't think we're hitting those supply chain issues anymore. So for most replacements, most retrofits, most projects are not going to go beyond the 2 years, or the year and a half, wherever we will be at that contract point. However, we know that electric projects can sometimes have a little bit longer, and if you need an extension, and if we need to extend the grants out, we will address that on a case-by-case basis. But do not apply for a project that you do not think that you can complete by the end, by the time we need it completed.
All right, thank you, Sheila. I don't see any more in the Q&A box, so just sort of a last call for questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in. So I've got a sample here. How is the 3 years of remaining life determined?
That is determined by the fleet manager. Usually, fleet owners will keep their vehicles for 10, 15 years, sell them to other people who will keep them for a couple years. It's the amount of time that you think that that vehicle has left to run. So even if you sell your used vehicle and they use it for another 5 years, you would add that into your equation. So it's really related. If you give us something that's out of bounds, that will be suspicious because there are tables and charts. We kind of know how many miles or how many hours a well-maintained engine can potentially have on it. So if you're submitting a 1967 engine that you think has 25, unless it's a locomotive, we're probably not going to buy that. So essentially, you can take your fleet, you can take when you've retired those vehicles and when those vehicles have died, and you can use your entire fleet as a gauge for the anticipated lifetime of the vehicle in question, and then calculate up to there.
All right, so it looks like we have one more question in the Q&A box. Does the new equipment need to comply with Build America, Buy America?
Only the infrastructure. So vehicles are exempt from the Build America, Buy America. It's only the infrastructure, and I'm working on trying to get a small projects waiver for that. But once again, that's something that you should definitely be in contact with me prior to applying to this project so we can discuss what those requirements look like and how we're going to navigate that in the next couple of months.
All right, so it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. Sheila, if you have any closing remarks, go ahead.
No, I thank you for joining us. I look forward to your applications. I look forward to helping you complete these applications, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions after this, or if you need more specific guidance in order to submit an application to us. And I look forward to receiving them. All right, thank you, everybody.